Hello, everybody. My name is Simon Bates. I am the owner-operator of Tithebarn Press. And here with me today is Professor Malcolm Murfett, the author of our very first book, which is Eden's Alternative to Appeasement. And Malcolm is Professor of War Studies at King's College London, and this is his 17th book. So Malcolm, perhaps you could just begin by giving us a brief overview of what you cover in the book, what the book's about.
Yes, of course. Thanks very much for having me, Simon. The book is actually about a what if of history. I thought that the whole appeasement story is extremely well known, particularly the European aspect of it, with the build up to Munich and thereafter. Um, but this book looks at another issue complete. It doesn't involve Germany or Italy, although I think there would be a knock-on effect to those, but it involves Britain and Japan and the United States. And for a time, in the latter part of 1937 and the start of 1938, there was a real chance that Anglo-American relations would come to the fore and would deal with the threat posed by Japan. Japan had attacked China again, an undeclared war starting in July 1937, which was, of course, to go on until 1945. And Eden, who was the British Foreign Secretary in Chamberlain's government, had this feeling that America was Britain's best friend because the Pacific and Southeast Asia and East Asia were regarded as being within, in a general sense, the American sphere of influence, the Pacific in particular, of course, that the Americans might be prepared to do something like joint or parallel action of a naval kind with the Royal Navy in a bid to halt Japan before she posed even a further threat, and also perhaps to have the knock-on effect of showing to the dictatorships that the democracies weren't actually feeble, that they could press their claims against being an aggressive tactics of Germany, Italy, and Japan.
Yes, that's exactly it. I remember when we first talked about this, the kind of the way you pitched it to me was that very much that idea of, well, what could have happened if the democracies had been able to show a bit earlier that they could stand up for themselves. And in a sense, I suppose the book is about why that did not happen and whether
Mhm.
they could have. I know you originally wrote your PhD thesis on this, and that's right, and then developed a book in the 1980s called Foolproof Relations, which this book is a sort of spiritual sequel to almost, or a revision of. Um, so why did you sort of feel after, gosh, was that about 40 years that you wanted to revisit those same events, and how do you think your perspective on kind of what happened and the personalities involved has changed in that time?
Excellent couple of questions, Simon. I think I always felt that the story about Japan, Britain, and the US um, didn't get the coverage it deserved in the appeasement story. It kind of got lost. It didn't come to anything, and therefore, so what?
Yeah.
Uh, and maybe I think a lot of people thought that it failed that so what test, and therefore didn't, take it up and didn't talk about it and so forth. I published the my book, which is a book of the doctorate, but it was really looking at Anglo-American relations and in terms of naval cooperation between 1937 and 1940. The first part of the book was about Eden's influence upon these events, and the second part of the book was about Chamberlain after Eden had left the Foreign Office in February 1938. Now, I felt that I published it in Singapore
Yeah.
as a particular favor to my head of department, who was a magnificent man, a, a former Home Secretary or Secretary of State for Home Affairs um, in Singapore, and MP for Alexandria and so forth, and Professor Wong Lin Ken, the best head of department I ever had, by the way, um, uh, had suggested that it would be a very fine thing for me to do to publish with the Singapore University Press, and so I did that in 1984 as a because I'd promised him that I would do that. Um, so I, looking back now, um, 40 odd years on, I thought, well, why don't I readdress that whole issue? Why don't I look back and see, was I right in what I was saying at the time? I was quite pro-Eden back
Yeah.
in the 80s, the 70s and 80s. I think, interestingly enough, I'm not quite so pro-Eden now, which is fascinating. And I think the book will bring this out as well. I mean, I think it was an interesting idea, and it might actually have come into prominence had the Americans, particularly Roosevelt, who I think was intrigued by the possibilities of doing something, but was constrained by isolationism back home, uh, and and therefore having felt a kind of an interest in moving Anglo-American relations on, withdrew in the end from really doing something constructive about it. Um, so I wanted to relook at this thing and think, well, look, okay, after such a long period of time, what's your feeling now about it? I think the book brings out what I feel about it now. I think it's a story that deserves to be told or retold. Um, and I think an awful lot of people have not read about this story. I mean, after 40 years, books get lost. And I wanted this one to reignite a bit of a flame here.
You had a sort of indirect personal connection as well with Eden, didn't you? Is that right?
I worked for Lord Birkenhead on the Churchill volume, single volume. Um, we were working alongside, or really in competition with, Martin Gilbert. And the Churchill Archive was back then was in the Bodleian Library in Oxford, and down many floors below Broad Street in Oxford. Um, and I worked on the Churchill papers, which were vast, voluminous, and which are now, of course, in Churchill College, Cambridge, in the archive centre there, and formed the great basis of the archive centre. And As a result of my work with Lord Birkenhead, I came across Eden's former personal secretary, Miss Chloe Otto, and uh, she was so lovely to me. I mean, this is a marvelous elderly lady. She'd been, in Downing Street at the time of Suez, and was hugely pro Eden, of course.
Yes, naturally.
But I mean, I stayed. She was so kind to me. Here am I, a fairly penniless student from Oxford, working in the public record office, as it was then before the National Archive renamed the National Archives. And she allowed me to stay with her in Belgravia, which was, I mean, wow, amazing in and of itself. Anyway, so that is another connection with this whole thing. And equally, my old and very lovely professor um, from Leeds, David Dilks, had worked closely with Lady Eden, and so there were various connections here.
Yeah. There's this kind of tension between two aspects, two elements within the book throughout, as I read it. And on the one hand, there's what Marxists might call big impersonal forces, or logistics, opportunity costs, democratic politics, political capital. And on the other hand, you have the personalities of, Anthony Eden, Roosevelt, Chamberlain, Ingersoll, and so on, all these the various other people we have black and white pictures of at the beginning of the book. Um, and I kind of wonder how you weigh the relative importance of those factors. Clearly, neither the one nor the other can be completely determinative, but how do you kind of come to a balanced position between those two extremes, as it were?
Well, I think what is absolutely vital is to engage yourself in the archival research that is necessary for a book of this nature. You can't just do it from reading secondary sources and so forth, although they can provide a lot of detail, but nothing like the amount of detail that you see in this book, which is drawn very closely from the FO files, the Foreign Office files, from the Prem files, and much else in the archives. I think what was crucial was that you had in Britain at this time both Neville Chamberlain and Anthony Eden, and they were quite dissimilar in many ways. Um, uh, Eden felt that the United States, and in particular FDR, Roosevelt, was a real potential friend, a real special relationship that one could think about. Chamberlain did not. In all honesty, and I know David Dilks would probably be aghast when I say this. I think Chamberlain, and is on record, and he's written to his sisters and much else about this. He didn't trust the Americans to say very much more than words. So you can't trust them, he would say. Um, and I think that he felt that Eden's ideas were risque in every way, and that frankly, it was much better to have a relationship, a constructive relationship in Europe, because what Eden was proposing was to send a vast amount of our Royal Navy's capital ships to the Far East, um, at a time when Germany and Italy were on the march, or looked as though they would be on the march. There, that was a classic combo there, the clash between Eden and Chamberlain, with Roosevelt thrown into the melting pot, appearing to be pro Eden and sympathetic to Eden's ideas, and then just withdrawing, as it were,
Mhm.
in January of and February of 38. But having said that, Chamberlain had helped to make Roosevelt withdraw by not responding in a positive way to what the
Yeah.
president was saying. So you had this tremendous clash, and people talk about Eden's resignation in February 1938 as a clash over Italy. Well, it was that, but it was also the long-running problems of the Far East and of the Americans, and the sense that somehow we'd missed the boat.
Yes, absolutely. And it's never just one thing at a time, is it? I mean, this is the thing with foreign policy, particularly in this period. There are little fires all over the place, and it's a question of clashes of priorities. Of course.
What you say is completely right. It's that what I wanted to do in this book, as I have done in my big book on the naval warfare from 1919 through 1945, is to introduce simultaneity into the action.
Yes.
So, in other words, to show what's going on at exactly the same time in different theatres. Um, and that was very much true of my naval warfare book. In this one, I wanted to make sure that, I really covered what was going on. And as far as the Far East was concerned, Far East or East Asia, Southeast Asia, and that kind of thing, and how the British and the Americans were looking at the problem of Japan, what to do about Japan.
Yeah.
Japan, after the Washington Conference of 1921-22, had been basically given a monopoly of power in the Western Pacific. So what on earth were the Brits going to do with this if there were real issues? I mean, after all, our Commonwealth, Malaya, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand,
All vulnerable.
what
Yeah.
all of these vulnerable, and what were we going to do about it? At the same time that Germany um, and Italy were involved in the Spanish Civil War. Italy had already beaten Abyssinia, and Germany had thrown off the sense of being belonging to the League of Nations. It was rearming and so forth. So there are real problems in Europe. Could you afford to send 7 or 8 capital ships, that is, battleships or
Yeah.
battle cruisers, to the Far East when all of this was potentially happening or actually happening in terms of Spain in Europe? This was the dilemma.
One of the things that both of your reviewers commented on, and that struck me as well, was there's a real sense of pace in your writing. Um, and partly, I suppose, because the period of time covered by the book is by and large quite a short one. It's a matter of months. Um, but nevertheless, how do you sort of weigh up the balance between kind of covering all those details and the making sure we're clear what's happening in different places at the same time on the one hand, with keeping that kind of core focus on the through line of the kind of personalities involved?
So I write as I speak, I think. Um, and I hate the idea of being bored, and I hate the idea of boring people. So pace and the way that the book is written, the sentences, they mean a lot to me. I don't, when I write something, I don't move on until I feel that sentence is exactly as I want it. I always used to give myself a task. I give myself 550 words a day, which I could retain as the building blocks of a particular book. Um, and this, I might write 3,000, 4,000 words, but if I could retain 550 and feel, yes, that's exactly what I want to say, then that's what I've done. And this is the same for this book too. I mean, I feel there's an awful lot. You don't want to sink into, a kind of bureaucratic morass here.
Yes.
You don't want to feel, well, I've got this book, and here we are, and page 65. Oh my God, I've got to get on beyond that. I want people, yes, they can delve into it at various ends, but I want them to feel interested in what I have to say. And if I'm not interested, then nobody else is going to be interested, or at least I would imagine not too
Yeah.
many other people. So I'm writing for intelligent people who are not necessarily experts in this field. I'm not writing for 34 experts. I never have. I've never thought that that was what I was about. In other words, I keep my students in mind and I keep myself in mind. So I'm writing for me and for them. And my students are both not just at a university, but all my readers who and people who come in to lectures and so forth, and who appear to enjoy what I have to say. So I keep those in mind. I don't want to bore people.
No,
Boom.
absolutely. Yeah, I also remember one of the things that probably more than any other book I've worked on with just about anybody, the speed at which you were able to write this was remarkable. It's clearly you're clearly holding a lot of this in your head.
Yeah, I mean, I think the joy of this was that I was rediscovering this whole time period
Mm.
again and going through it again and feeling interestingly different at points about it. As I say, I think I'm a little less gung ho.
Yes.
Well, that's possibly because I'm older. But nonetheless, I think that this was a very fascinating episode in British foreign policy, and I think it's been ignored for too long.
Sort of come back to the question of Anthony Eden. I mean, if anyone's the hero of this story or the sort of anti-hero of this story, perhaps it's him. And readers are more likely to know him from the subsequent events in his career. Of course, he was Churchill's foreign secretary when Churchill replaces Chamberlain. So he's foreign secretary throughout the most of the Second World War. And then, of course, succeeds Churchill as prime minister in the 1950s and then famously sort of crashes and burns through with the Suez crisis that he um, is a huge part of. To what extent do you think you can see the same kind of characteristics in this sort of story and from Eden's life, as it were, that then lead to both the kind of successes and ultimate downfall later on?
I think Eden was a very self-confident individual. He rated his intelligence. He thought he was brighter than most, if not all, uh, and and had ideas. He felt that those ideas deserved to be brought into play. But of course, he was as Foreign Secretary. You and often in foreign affairs, remember prime ministers engage themselves very much better. I remember, what they in Willy Brandt's government in West Germany, as it then was, Brandt did virtually, as Chancellor, did virtually everything on the
Yes.
foreign field, and his foreign secretary, basically, or foreign minister, was only used for things that Brandt didn't actually want to do.
Well, one thinks of Tony Blair or Keir Starmer in the same way, or Boris Johnson for that matter.
Oh, of course, because I mean it's really quite something being up there. Um, but I think Eden um, wanted the opportunity of being in real power and waited a very long time for it, probably much longer than he ought to have done. I mean, people talk about Churchill's Indian summer from 51 through 55, but the point is Eden was literally champing at the bit to get into power. Now, what he didn't want to happen was what happened in Egypt. Yes, he was quite prepared to withdraw British troops from Egypt as long as Egypt remained very much in the British basket, as it were.
Yes.
But
Yes.
when Nasser came to the fore, um, then with a different agenda, a much more nationalistic agenda. Well, Eden did not like this. Now, Eden, very smart man, did Oriental languages or Arabic and other foreign languages at Oxford. Got a first. Was very bright. Uh, Whenever he was engaged with Nasser, can you believe this? Did he speak in Arabic? No, he did not. He spoke purely in English. Uh, and I mean, it wasn't because he was deficient in the language. He knew it. but it was a kind of a sense of superiority.
Yeah.
The last thing that Eden wanted was what Nasser was doing, engaging with the communists, with the Czechs, and so forth. And in the end, he saw in Nasser another Mussolini. He's on record as saying it. And I think that this whole business leading up to 56 really brings him back into the 30s, the late 30s, and to the whole appeasement story. You do not appease bullies and thugs. And that's what he saw Nasser as being. Now, the French also didn't like Nasser, neither did the Americans. But Eden was determined to bring about regime change if he could not keep Nasser under control, and the sense was you couldn't. Um, but to attempt an invasion of Egypt just days before the American presidential election, when Eisenhower was running against a peace candidate as a peaceful man, was crazy. I mean, the Americans did not want Nasser to triumph, to nationalize the Suez Canal or anything else, but to engage in warfare in this way. But this is something which I'm going to explore again, or actually for the first time for me, but I've done it for 40 years or so in lectures. In my next book, which Tithebarn Press, I hope will publish in about 18 months or 2 years from now.
We should be very much looking forward to that. Yes. The next thing I wanted to ask actually is an echo in itself of what you were just saying about the sense that Eden maybe learns the wrong lessons or lessons that he kind of misapplies from his own history. I mean, one of the things that people have said about this book is that very much that it has echoes of contemporary events. Certainly when we're talking about, what democracies can do to stand up or can or cannot do to stand up to big powers. And I've highlighted when I've written about the book, the comparison with what the US has been doing in Iran lately, um, which of course was something that hadn't even happened yet at the stage when you were writing the manuscript, which really just goes to show that these things just repeat in different variations. But in terms of what perhaps we can learn from this period, what do you think kind of the most important parallels or significant lessons might be, assuming that it is possible to learn anything from history?
Well, I would like to think that we do learn something from history. Otherwise, what on earth have I been doing for the last 40 years? Um, Look, I think that you have to be careful in strategizing. You have to be careful not to be involved too much with wishful thinking.
Yes.
I think that the sense that, oh, I can do this in one fell swoop, it's going to happen, it's going to change, and so forth. I mean, do you know enough? Do you have enough historical knowledge? Do you know what, for example, what Iran is like,
Yes.
actually, in terms of the peoples? Are you certain that by eliminating the top of the Iranian leadership, you are going to bring about people on the streets and demanding, revolution? Well, I would suggest to you that that has not been the case as far as the Americans or the Israelis have been concerned. And I would suggest also that it's true of Eden to a great extent about the Americans. To what extent, are you, and towards the Japanese as well, to what extent do you really know the pressures on policymakers elsewhere? And the point is that you can feel that, oh, the ends justify the means, and oh, I think that we could really do this. And you see, if we stand up to the Japanese, what is that going to say to the European powers? It's going to say, don't mess with us because we're not fickle and feeble. But yeah, you have to be careful. You have to be careful. What if the Japanese don't come forward to engage
Yeah.
you in some kind of battle that you might have hoped would then render the Imperial Japanese Navy to be, a non-starter going forward. You have to be very careful that you know. But how many politicians are prepared to spend time reading and listening and engaging and and having people who might be saying contrary things to them? I mean, I remember very much that Napoleon relied upon Talleyrand until he felt that he didn't need him any longer. And as soon as he didn't need him any longer, he began to make mistakes. The problem is that when you're at the top, you don't want people saying things that you don't want to
You don't
hear.
like, yeah, you don't want to hear exactly. And that's yeah, so that one is definitely a lesson we can see throughout history, isn't it? And I think one of it's interesting how many parallels jump to mind just within this period of the early Second World War of strategic miscalculations, where in a sense, what the Japanese attempt at Pearl Harbor is somewhat symmetrical with what Eden was considering doing to them, and it does not work out well, but it could have.
Well, also, I mean, had the Japanese listened to their spies, and particularly their best spy on Hawaii, they would have known that, the aircraft carriers were not in port. And that, there were some battleships, but not all of them. And so, really, again, the idea that you're going to go through and do this, even though what you wanted is not there,
Yeah, it's
is extraordinary. But what the Japanese could have done was, of course, bombed like crazy all the oil facilities. And they didn't,
no.
not in the way that they should have
No,
done.
no. It's
So yeah, but even so, let's not forget between December of 41 through to April, really, of 42, they were
yeah,
extraordinary.
yeah, oh, absolutely. And it is too easy sometimes to look at history and see what happened and assume or to feel that it was inevitable. And in the case, for example, of this book, I think what it demonstrates is actually other things were possible. What the consequences of those things had they been attempted is we can never know. But and I think in some ways the fascination of this story is why they did not happen and how a few things being slightly different might have allowed Eden's plans to come to fruition.
I think one thing before we
Yeah.
end, Simon, is to talk about inevitability. I mean, I tell my students, please don't keep harping on, oh, it was inevitable.
Yes.
It was like saying, it was inevitable that Arsenal would win the Premier League yesterday, or 2 days or 3 days ago. Well, no, it wasn't inevitable at all. Could easily have been something else. So you can't be certain. Things happen that you don't expect, and you have to then adapt. I mean, like warfare.
Yeah.
Moltke said that whatever the best laid plan, it goes out of the window basically after the first shots are fired. Boom.
Yes, absolutely. Your opponent has a plan too. Usually. Anyway. Okay. let's wrap that up there. Thank you so much for your time, Professor Malcolm. It's been absolutely fascinating to get to talk to you about your book in this detail with you. And just a reminder to everybody, that's Eden's Alternative to Appeasement, the Anglo-American strategy that might have been 1937 to 1938, as Malcolm is showing us now. And yes, thank you so much for your time, and we'll look forward to discussing your next book with you in a couple of years.
Very much for having me. Goodbye.